Director and Center for Renewing America President. Russ, great to see you. Thanks for being here. Now, markets, at first, they kind of breathed a sigh of relief and went up as a result of the 75 basis points, which they were expecting. They were worried about a full percentage point. But then they came down on what he said, on what Powell was talking about. What specifically spooked them?
My guess is what spooked him is that the Fed chairman is continuing to articulate to the country and the markets that this is going to be a long haul, and that if there is any thought that this is going to be something that will just be passing and that there's not hardship ahead, that's the wrong thought, and I think they're now having to adjust to that. And I think they continue to have a hard time realizing that Jay Powell is recognizing his inner hawk with his stances on this. First, his speech out west, and now this decision and the articulation of 2 more rate hikes definitely coming. And so I think that's what they're reacting to, is the extent to which this is going to be some pain.
Was he essentially saying that we are going to have a recession? Of course, a lot of people say we're already in one, but was this kind of an admission on his part that we're going to have one?
I think it's an admission that we're not going to have a soft landing, and that to the extent to which the Fed thought that they could just raise to 4% and that inflation would come down and they would somehow meet in the middle is not necessarily what the last radar detected, and that this is going to be a little choppy, and that the markets and the American public needs to be ready for that.
Well, Russ, considering that we have an administration in power that has no incentives or no desire to create incentives for the private sector to grow, their whole focus for growth is on the government to grow, not the private sector. In fact, if anything, a lot of these new regulations will shrink the private sector even more. I don't see the way the private sector in our country can avoid a recession. Do you?
I don't, and I think this is where the Fed chairman needs to speak a little more boldly to the administration and Congress, and that is stop making our lives more difficult. Stop doing student loan cancellations that puts $1 trillion back in, that forces us to deal with another 75 basis points just to stay even to where we were, and stop having an economic policy that is so entirely oriented away from growth that makes it harder for the Fed to do its work. And I think you're right. The Biden administration is going to just continue to lay blame at the Fed under the independence of the Fed. But the reality is they're making the problem worse, and it's only going to continue to create more pain for the public at large.
Do you think that words from the Fed chair would have any effect on this administration at all, though? I mean, they seem so hell-bent on the direction in which they're going. I don't know if Powell would do anything to change their minds.
It certainly wouldn't change the minds of the ideologues in the West Wing, but it would impact the narrative. It would impact some of the Democratic senators that they look to for being able to get the votes for various policy initiatives through the Senate. And I think it would help the country that is not already down on the Biden administration, and that is a large group of people. I think it would help the country realize the extent to which this isn't all the Fed's fault for being late to the game, which they were. It is much to do with the Biden administration hitting the gas when we had already provided the necessary resources to deal with the economic shock coming from COVID.
You know, it's a little more than hitting the gas, I think. I think it is. They really are trying to transform the economy into one in which the government controls industrial production. That's what I take from their big economic plan, which is focused, of course, on green energy more than anything else. But again, it's moving the power of the economy from the private sector to the government. What do you think?
I agree with that. I mean, everything from their regulatory policy to their distaste for American energy that starves entrepreneurs and businesses of the energy that they need. Everything from the reality of how anything that they do, whether it's trying to spend money for chip subsidies, they launch a task force, they command and control it from Washington, D.C. They don't have a sense about how to get the economy growing by providing incentives for people to take risk and to be able to go and use their initiative to grow their business and the economy at large.
And, of course, there's a name for that, Russ, and that is socialism. I mean, we're talking about a government that is pretty evenly divided right now. The 3 branches of government And with a division like that, pretty much 50-50, they're trying to transform the United States into a socialist economy. That's a very dangerous thing.
And you saw that in their so-called Inflationary Reduction Act. I mean, that was something that they billed as reducing inflation. It didn't. It increased the deficit. But it was largely an effort to be the first down payment, the mass down payment on the Green New Deal, to provide the economic incentives to be able to get to the point where they can come along later and add the mandates that are so politically unsustainable right now. They're trying to create new economic sectors that ask for those mandates at a later date. And it's just a perfect example there. They're always thinking about how to advance their ideological and their mission in the midst of trying to solve the real world problems that we're facing, and the American people are asking for real leadership. They just don't ever provide it.
And Russ, I know you're an economic guy, but I want to ask you a political question. Will the voters buy it? I mean, they're going to paint this huge target on the back of Powell saying he's to blame for the recession, for everything that led up to it, including inflation. Do you think the voters will buy it? Because I think they're getting very wary of this talk.
No, they're not going to buy it because the Biden administration does things like the student loan cancellation, and everyone who is aware of that realizes that is inflationary. And so that takes away from their desire to blame it on the Fed. Now, do I think that the public will blame the Fed for a portion of this, for being too late to the game? Yes, I do. But I think that the Biden administration will wear the vast majority of this blame, because everything that they have done has been to hurt the economy, to increase spending, and as a result, they are responsible for increasing inflation that we are living in right now.
And to transform America with a 50-50 split in government, I mean, there is no mandate there, and probably less so after the elections. Russ Vought, good to see you. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it. Well, Governor